All right. So for our presentation, we worked on the connection of modern and indigenous agricultural practices with a focus on the Three Sisters planting method that we learned about here at AgroTek. And we separated this off into four distinct sections. So I am Sydney, and I worked on kind of investigating some of the cultural aspects around that and really diving into the Indigenous history that surrounded the Three Sisters planting practice.
I'm Mia, and I worked on the science behind the Three Sisters and our idea for an app.
I'm Jordan, and I worked on explaining the experiment we did and the data we collected from it.
I'm Rose, and I made the pamphlets with the key information.
So the first thing we, of course, wanted to start off with is an acknowledgement of the fact that the present modern practices that we learned about here did stem from Indigenous roots. So the practice of Three Sisters planting is known to many as a common gardening practice. However, the roots of this tradition do go much deeper. The Winnockpeg, an Indigenous tribe that still exists where the initial contact with settlers occurred, and the Abenaki, whose territory many of us in this room live on in the Upper Valley, have all produced this combination of the three plants together across the Americas, though the practices do differ from region to region. The oldest Thanksgiving myths make frequent use of the Three Sisters. According to the story, the Winnockpeg helped the Puritans plant the three seeds and prevented them from starving by welcoming them into their territory. The two parties had a meal to commemorate the harvest, and then the Winnockpeg slipped away to conveniently enable the colonization of America. However, the truth of the matter is way more cynical and darkened than those myths would attempt to lead you to believe. The Native Americans are still here. They have survived genocide, sickness, war, violent assimilation attempts, and removal from their land. In the acknowledgement and the beauty of their agricultural practices, it is crucial we acknowledge how far our nation, our state, our individual communities need to come to recognize the significant Native Americans have had and continue to play, and the rights that we have stripped them of. So with that, we'd like to bring us to a land acknowledgement. So we want to here honor the legacy of Vermont's Indigenous people, the Abenaki people of the Dawn, who have cared for this land for generations and continue to do so. We recognize that colonialism and the oppression of the Native peoples are current and an ongoing process, and we commit to building an awareness of a present participation. We pay our respects to the elders, past and present, and we honor with deep gratitude this land and all that it gives us. We also honor the histories of BIPOC people and acknowledge both the painful history of enslavement and that this country was built on the backs of Black and Brown people. In the words of Chief Don Stevens of the Nuhin tribe, quote, "Please learn more about the Abenaki culture and history, support the Abenaki people, stay engaged, be kind and caring and accepting to the Abenaki people, and honor the fact that they have always had and continue to have a lot to offer," unquote.
Okay, so the Three Sisters agriculture technique utilizes the unique aspects of three different crops and their ability to work together and be stronger together. There are three plants involved in the Three Sisters agricultural technique. There's beans, squash, and corn. Corn and squash are planted first and allowed to grow for 2 to 3 weeks before the bean is planted. This allows the corn and squash to provide their essential structures. Corn is tall and stable by the time the bean is planted, allowing it to grow against the corn stalk and use it for support. The squash provides ground cover, keeping all the soil moist and insects away from the plants. Once the bean has grown, it is able to fix or convert nitrogen from the air into a bioavailable source for the plants. These three plants work together in an incredible symbiotic relationship, providing essential structures and nutrients to each other. While traditionally there's only 3 sisters in this agricultural practice, I thought I might add that sometimes there is a fourth. It is usually a form of sunflower or other flower able to attract insect pollinators.
All right, so the experiment. So I broke down the experiment that we did into 4 parts that I will explain. Of course, we did an experiment because we are scientists. Since we had a limited amount of time, Jana set up the experiment beforehand to allow the plants to grow. So that way we could analyze the data and collect it ourselves. And next slide. As an academy, we had already split up into 4 different groups for such experiments, different than we are in today. And each of these groups got 4 flat and dome compartments, which have a thorough and wonderful explanation in the pamphlets that Rose made. And in each of these compartments, there were 18 pouches, each with a different combination of plants, like corn, 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 bean, squash, so on and so forth. So many. So yeah, you can see the grow pouches on the other side over there. They're cute and small, but big enough that you can count their roots. And the way that the grow pouches are, you can cut them open and see their root systems and count them. And so there's a primary root, next slide, which we measured. I circled 2 primary roots of 2 different plants. The primary root is the first root to grow from the seed. It's typically the longest or the thickest root, but it can be kind of hard to determine because at this stage, they're young. It's hard to see if there's multiple roots growing from the seed directly. And then there's also lateral roots, which we counted, which come off of the primary root. If you go to the next slide, I have circled quite a few different examples of lateral roots. Lateral roots typically come off of the primary root at an angle like this, but the angle and the length of those lateral roots actually can tell you the health and the needs of the plants themselves. So that's one way that scientists and farmers themselves can listen to their plants and their crops. Also, this is quite chaotic. There's a lot of roots there. So there were, in many of our plants, multiple thick roots coming off of the seed itself. And we decided as a huge group that we were going to count those as lateral roots because we felt that that was important data points to include in our data collection. If you go to the next slide, that is the data we collected. This is one of our group's data, and as you can see, there's a ton of NAs all over the place, and there's an observation column. This is because there were quite a few seeds that did not grow at all, or a bunch of seeds that started to grow but then stopped. In the observation section, for the seeds that did not grow at all, we wrote did not germinate as an observation. And then for the seeds that started to grow and then stopped, we also wrote down that it was aborted, but we still had data to collect on those. So we still wrote down that data. And then another reason for these NA not applicables is because we were also counting nodules on bean plants. Only beans in these 3 different kinds of plants that we looked at can grow nodules. So there's also a lot of NAs for the corn and the squash because they didn't have nodules. Yeah, and that is the experiment that we did. Next slide. There you go.
Okay, so as Jordan kind of explained with the experiment, lateral roots, there was many, and you could see how kind of complicated they were. So there's an extensive portion of counting the roots in plants as one way of determining how well different plants were growing together. This was all counted by hand, and they got up past 300 roots, often just for one plant, with many plants in total to count. So our idea coming out of this was to make a mobile app that was able to scan plants and determine the number of roots. And it's both efficient and accurate for counting roots. And it's also more inclusive of everyone because often science can feel closed off or unwelcoming to somebody who's not gone through years of school. But this is inclusive and user-friendly and easy to count the roots.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank you guys for listening and for the option to both share the learning that we had here at AgroTek and deepen our understanding of these Indigenous practices. So now we'd like to open it up to questions.
There was so much in there. I think we have time for one judge's question.
Have to do this presentation so much is just the process. And out in the field, in the lab, what?
Honestly, I mean, I think we got a really good mix of everything. Like we were in the lab and counting the roots, and then we were also able to gather soil samples out at the farm. So I feel like we had like a pretty good mix. But like honestly, I would have just done another week. But yeah, I feel like we had a really good mix already within the program. But I don't know if you guys had anything you guys wanted to add.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with
I totally agree. I also would enjoy going further and seeing different treatments and how that changes the root systems and how they grow differently. I know that was part of the experiment with Jana, but we didn't get to actually analyze that. We didn't have the time to. So another week would allow us to do that. Yeah.